Hello, if you're listening to this webcast, then you should be in Philosophy 4, Theory of Knowledge at Las Positas College, and this is our special Halloween episode to make up for the class that we will be missing on October 31st. So the first of these mini lectures is going to be about positivism and verificationism. If you look to your text, this will be Ayer, pages 246, and this is in the Moser Reader. Now, to get a sense of what Ayer and the people working with him were interested in with positivism and verificationism, we have to think of these terms relative to an entire societal movement that's going on at the time. And this movement is one we're familiar with, one that continues to today, which is an attempt to take empirical science and the things that have worked really well with empirical science, getting at knowledge, and using that as a starting point or as an example for what knowledge should look like in general. When we do empirical science, in general, we have a sense for how we can get knowledge on which we can all agree, how we can work together with that knowledge, see it in the same way, get conclusions that are justifiable, and we also have a sense of our ability to use the scientific method to separate truth on the one hand from falsity on the other hand. So if someone comes in and says vitamin C cures cancer and makes you smarter and also prevents disease, we can go and we can test that by getting observations of people who've had more vitamin C than others, and using the effects that we see on people through our observation to test whether or not vitamin C cures cancer, keeps people from getting sick, and does any complete list of things that we're looking for in a test according to whatever we test. So verificationism falls within this basic strategy. And Ayer is and was for his entire career interested in taking the scientific model and using that as an understanding for how all philosophy should work in general, with the idea that if you have claims that can't be justified by experiences, then the claim is going to be that those are just nonsense. So Ayer divides his analysis into strong verificationism and weak verificationism. So strong verificationism is a theory that had been put out before the time of Ayer. And the basic claim of this theory is that a claim about the world, really this means any claim at all that isn't just a definition, is meaningless unless it entails specific experiences that would prove it to be true. So a claim about the world is meaningless unless it entails specific experiences that would prove that claim to be true. So let's take an ordinary claim. It's Halloween, so I guess this is a good example. Professor Bodnar is dead. Here's a claim. It's a claim about the world. It's a claim about reality, about what the world is like. So what would it mean if I was to reduce the claim Professor Bodnar is dead to a claim that satisfies the verificationist criteria? It's going to be meaningless unless it entails specific experiences that would prove it to be true. So what are these specific experiences that would entail the truth of the claim Professor Bodnar is dead? Because this is going to be all we really mean when we say it. What we mean by a term, by a statement, if it's meaningful, is just the set of observations that would entail its truth. So what are we assuming is true if I say Professor Bodnar is dead? What am I really telling you about the nature of the world and what you will experience in the world? Because for the verificationist, the only way I get meaning to a statement is by telling you what you will experience in the world. If there's no difference in your experience for one thing being true versus another being true, then there's no way to verify that principle, and so it should be rejected. So what am I claiming about the nature of experience when I make this statement? Well, probably something like this, right? If I was to open his casket, I would see that his heart has stopped beating. So dead is not a metaphysical status. It's something about what I would observe if I found this guy and I actually got sense experience relevant to his condition. So the basic process should be relatively straightforward here, right? I translate the claim into direct sense observations that would show if it was true, and then ask if the relevant observations do in fact verify the truth of the claim. So the claim is meaningful if I say Professor Bodnar is dead, because I've given you a specific way to test in your experience whether or not it's true. And then I can ask the question, am I justified in believing that Professor Bodnar is dead? In this case, you're actually listening to this lecture after the fact from my recording it. So there's actually not a lot that you can do to prove that I'm either dead or not dead. If I was still in the classroom, I suppose you could, I don't know, take a look, see if I was walking around, see if my heart was still beating if I put the microphone up to my heart. And presumably those relevant observations, and of course it's not going to be just literally his heart was stopped beating, his heart has stopped beating, he's not moving, he didn't show up for class today, he, I don't know, skin is starting to decompose, whatever you like. And those relevant observations are not going to be made, therefore the claim that I'm dead would not be verified. In the case of me actually not being here, because we're pre-recording this discussion, it's actually not as clear what the relevant direct observation would be that proves my claim true. And Ayer is actually going to address that problem later on. So, strong verificationism, there's particular experiences you can have that prove my claim to be true. There is a computer in front of you right now. That's something that presumably is provable through a direct experience. All you have to do is look and see a computer screen. So your experience will be different. You can directly verify the claim by looking and seeing that it's true. You are a strong person. How would we directly verify that you're a strong person? Maybe you'd have the experience of, I don't know, lifting something heavy or something like that. As we'll see, for Ayer, it's going to turn out to be actually pretty difficult to take a particular claim and prove it through just one or two distinct experiences that would show it to be true. But that's what the strong verificationists wanted to do. If you can't show me the experience that proves your claim to be true, it's a meaningless statement because it doesn't tell me anything about what the world or my experience would be like. Alright. So what if it turns out that there are no specific observations that would prove a claim to be true? On the strong verificationist view, this means that your claim is meaningless. It's meaningless because it doesn't tell me anything about what the world would be like, and there's no way to show if it's true or false because nothing in experience is going to be different with the claim true rather than false. There's no way to observe the truth or falsity of a statement, and so it just has no meaning, at least none of the meaning that matters as far as what would make it true or false. So imagine, well, we'll get back to that, but imagine certain claims already, like, is this person my friend? What would be the specific observation that would entail someone as your friend rather than your enemy? It's not going to be easy to do. And Ayer gives in his discussion, started on page 246, some pretty strong reasons for thinking that this is actually not going to be possible. If you end up going to the reading here for clarification, the important part of Ayer actually starts on page 248, and it's the last paragraph of the first column. That's where you're going to find where Ayer distinguishes between strong and weak verificationism. The stuff that happens on the first 2 pages, 246 to 247, is not going to be as relevant for you. So that's right where you want to jump to start understanding these elements here. All right. So objections to strong verificationism by Ayer, who's going to defend weak verificationism. Objection number 1, the only empirical observations that certainly and directly prove claims are trivial and unhelpful. Now, what kind of realities can I prove? Just by a single direct observation that proves a claim to be true? Ayer is going to say not very much. He gives some possible examples like I feel pain. The fact that a pain exists can actually be proven to be certain from just a particular observation, namely your observation of yourself being in pain. But that's not really that informative, and no one really doubts, well, sometimes I guess we do, doubt if we're really in pain or imagining it. But for the most part, that's not going to get us very far. Or, I'm experiencing a red sensation. If we go back to the examples we gave, like, is someone my friend, or even is Professor Bodnar dead, there's no obvious single observation I could give that would prove that I am. Maybe I've taken some drug that slows my heartbeat down so low that you actually can't observe it. Or maybe I've tricked you by changing the microphone that you use to listen into my heart. So in that case, even though you have an experience, it doesn't mean that necessarily I am dead. It just means, well, as we'll see in a second, maybe there's good evidence to think that I am. A second objection given by Ayer to strict verificationism is the idea that all empirical facts, everything that we can observe in the world, even scientific observations, are known with probability and not with certainty. Right? There's a sense in which it seems that we would never know anything if we said that the only statements that are true about the world are ones where we can know for certain that they're true when we observe through our experience something that we can directly know. So let's take something like me being dead, right? We said for the first concern here, that's not the kind of thing that I can directly observe. It's something that you infer from things that you observe about me. And then for number 2 here, any observation that you get is only going to prove with a certain probability that I'm dead, and it can't be proven just directly and absolutely. Give pretty good evidence if I didn't show up, if you read my obituary, if you listened to my heart and you didn't hear it, if, I don't know, my best friend was crying. But it's not something you can directly observe. It's something that you conclude from a series of observations. Same thing would be true of something like friendship, right? Imagine that you're working with friendship. What would the direct observation be? Well, I don't know, maybe I gave you a present or something like that. But the mere fact that you got a present from me certainly doesn't prove that I'm your friend, although maybe it gives you some evidence for it. So what other observations would go into proving that I'm something like your friend or making it at least somewhat verifiable? Well, maybe I gave you a present on your birthday, I don't know, 5 years in a row. Maybe I was there when you called me in the middle of the night because you were fighting with someone else. Maybe I helped you out with a series of things. Maybe we spent a lot of time together. And so all these together verify through direct observation that I'm likely to be your friend, but it's not the kind of thing where a certain discrete observation can just prove it to be true. Alright, so we've already hinted at the fact that Ayer is going to say weak verificationism is the way to go. So he's still going to say that certain statements are meaningless, and they are meaningless if they don't talk about the way experience and observation would make them true or false. But he's lessening the expectation a bit. So, says Ayer, beyond definitions, a statement is only meaningful if there is direct experience that will make it probable as opposed to certain. So certain definitions are true when they're not something like experience, right? I mean, that a friend is someone who takes care of you or something like that. Maybe this is just true in virtue of the definition of friendship, but certain things about you being my friend aren't true just by definition. They're true in virtue of what you do, and in virtue of what I observe you doing, I have a good reason to conclude that you're really my friend. It can never be proven with certainty, but it's probable. Let's maybe talk about the reverse. Let's say that someone claims to be my friend, and yet they never ever do anything that would make my life better. They never ask me how my day was. They're never there to spend time with me. They never buy me a present on my birthday, whatever it is. Then we would want to say that someone's claim that they were my friendship, and then they said, well, there's nothing that I have to do. There's nothing you have to observe specifically about it. There's no difference it would make in the world to be my friend. I want to say something like, well, the fact that you're claiming to be my friend is just meaningless. Unless claiming you're my friend should have implications for what I observe in the world, for how you relate back to me, then the claim to be my friend is just a meaningless claim. So, in the case of someone who uses the claim, you're my friend, without any suggestion that it should make a difference for what I observe in the world, I want to say his claim to be my friend is meaningless. For the person for whom it's meaningful, and the person who's using the word correctly, we would say, if you're my friend, I should observe this set of things. That set of things isn't going to prove with absolute certainty you're my friend, because maybe you did it all because you want to get something out of me, and I just don't know it yet. But it makes it more probable as I have more and more observations that are the kind of thing that confirm that you are my friend. All right. So Professor Bodnar is dead. Again, we said already, this is the kind of thing that a series of empirical observations is going to make more probable, although never certain, right? I'm absent, you read my obituary, etc., etc. All right. Now, Ayer gives some other examples along the way of things that might or might not be proven true for verificationism. So let's say we're talking about the existence of God. The strong verificationist is going to say that when I say God exists, I'm just pointing to some direct observations that prove it to be true. Basically, this would mean something like seeing God. You can believe God exists if you see God and experience God directly. Of course, if the strong verificationist actually thinks that the only thing we can see directly is our own sense data, the own reflections of colors on our retina or something like that, then God, which is a very conceptual idea, isn't going to be something I can see directly. But even if we loosen that a little bit and say, you can believe in God if you see God directly, chances are that for most of us, that's not the kind of experience we would use to verify the existence of God. Now, we might then say, well, what about the weak verificationist? Can the weak verificationist give an example where saying I believe in God actually has a meaning because it's something that would change experience to give evidence for its truth? So I might point to such possible experiences. If I can't, then I'm going to have to say my statement is meaningless. If I can point to some observations, the way the world would be different if it was true, then I can start to verify that and prove it more probable. So maybe I'd say something like this. When I say God exists, I must be pointing to some observable conditions that make it probable. Now, what kind of thing might that be? Well, I don't know. Maybe we would point to something like, if there was a good God in the world, then good people would be rewarded. There would be order in the universe. prayers would be answered. And so maybe this is at least in part a verifiable claim. I say God exists. What I mean is there's an order behind the universe, both a physical order and a moral order, such that when people do the wrong thing, they get punished, and the right thing, they get rewarded. And when I ask prayers, they would be answered. This would be a way to take the verificationist principle, apply it, the weak verificationist principle, right? Apply it to the claim that God exists, and say I really am saying something about what you'll find in the world if the claim that God exists is true. Now, of course, whether or not you decide God really exists, not just that the term is meaningful, but that God really exists on this principle, depends on how you answer these questions. So do you think that the world basically works out for justice, or does it not? Is there order in the universe, or does the chaos in the universe seem to outdo the order? When you ask for a prayer, is it really answered? And can we show prayers being answered so that the outcome of actions is different in cases where we pray or we don't? And those are bigger questions that we can't really answer right now, but you can see how they would play into the verificationist definition of what I mean when I say, does God exist? Now, on the other hand, there are probably many religious people who would say, well, wait a minute. Good people are not rewarded, but God still exists. And there is chaos in the universe. Maybe physics tells us something about this, but God still exists. And maybe there's no proof that prayers are answered, because half the time God says no and half the time God says yes. So you can't look to the answering of prayers to prove that God really exists, but God really exists. So if you reject the idea that anything about the evidence we get from the world would prove God's existence, then Ayer is going to say, well, wait a minute, then the claim that you've made is a claim that no fact of observation could ever tell us if it's true or not, and so it's meaningless. So we might, like we did in the first case, say, well, yeah, God's existence is verifiable by weak verificationism because these things are basically true. At least we can investigate these things to see if they're true. On the other hand, if you say, no matter what the outcome of these is, the claim God exists, we have the same reason for believing it regardless of any evidence we observe in the world, then Ayer is going to say your claim is actually meaningless because there's nothing to observe that corresponds to that. And on the other hand, if you say God's existence is meaningful, even though there's no observation that can prove it to be true, it's sort of tantamount to saying you're not a verificationist, even a weak one, because you're claiming there are some claims that are meaningful, even though the world can't show them to be true. We just know them through some other means. All right. So the problem of other minds definitely fits in the same category, right? The problem of other minds, a famous problem in philosophy, is just, how do I know that other people have minds? Now, can you see why this is a problem for the verificationist? Every one of us believes that every person in our class, everyone who's in your family, has a mind just the way that you have a mind. They have a conscious experience, just like you have conscious experience. But the verificationist says claims are only true if we can directly observe that they're true. Of course, none of us can directly observe the minds of someone else, which means that the strong verificationist is not going to be able to prove that anyone else but you has a mind. You can directly observe, let's say, your own mind, your own thinking. Descartes says this, right? But what about the minds of others? If I can only accept claims where there are very direct observations that prove them to be true, I can never prove that you have a mind. But weak verificationism might give me more leeway. Are there observations I can make in the world that make the claim that you have a mind, and that, even though I can't observe it, that make that claim more probable? So we might say something like this. An observation that makes the claim that you have a mind more probable is your behavior which is purposeful use of language, emotional expression. All of these things, which I could presumably at least somewhat observe, are you coming into the class and sitting in a seat. Maybe that's good evidence that you have concepts of what class and seat are like, and so I might say, well, it's a good chance he has a mind. Are you using language in a way that seems to suggest that you have a mind that understands what language means? If you cry when you bump into a desk and hurt yourself, it seems to imply, at least suggest, that you have emotions relative to that. Notice that it can never be proven absolutely certain in the case that one observation proves you have all those things. Maybe, I don't know, we've developed a clever robot that knows how to do all of these things and yet doesn't actually have a mind. But the weak verificationist is going to say, well, at least we have observations that make a claim more probable, and then the claim can at least be meaningful. If there's no observation about you that would prove that you don't have a mind, or that would verify that you do have one, then your claim is meaningless. Hopefully you can see how history would fit into this category as well. For the strong verificationist, history is going to be a problem. Why? Because I can't directly observe the past, right? So if the strong verificationist says a statement's only meaningful if you can directly observe it, and I say, okay, I don't know, Plato lived 2,600 years ago, there's no way that my current experience could ever prove that to be true. But the weak verificationist can gather evidence that makes the existence of Plato or Napoleon more probable. He's mentioned in history books. His political ideas have changed contemporary political scenarios. And certainly I can say, if I had been there at Napoleon's time, here's how the world would have been different. But even for today, the fact that he's mentioned in history books, and he affected contemporary geopolitics, gives me some reason to believe that he actually existed. Again, it's not irrefutable evidence. It could turn out that Napoleon was just, I don't know, some kind of idea constructed out of conspiracy to justify contemporary political scenarios, and so Napoleon never existed. It's not impossible, but the more evidence I get for how he fits into history and our contemporary politics, the more evidence I have that it's likely to be true. So it's not meaningless because there's some way to verify it. Alright, so this is the end for what we need to do for verificationism, and I hope you can see the ways in which this should apply back to your topic. So for any topic that you're considering, you'll want to do at least a couple of things. One thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to say, for strong verificationism, you'll want to say, first of all, how would a strong verificationist give meaning to this claim? And remember what this is going to mean. It's going to mean direct experience that proves it to be true. If I can't get it, meaningless claim. If I can get it, in other words, if there is some experience that would prove the claim to be true, the question is going to be, is it justified? Is my claim justified by this specific experience? In other words, did I find some experience that proves this claim must be true. Some specific experience, right? But I'm also going to want to go back and think about weak verificationism. And of course, the first question that I'll ask here is, how would a weak verificationist give meaning to this claim? Which is going to mean listing specific observations that would make the claim more probable. And Ayer puts less emphasis on specific here, but observations that would make the claim more probable. So, am I going to get this? Well, again, the question is going to be, can I describe those observations? Let's call them possible observations. If the answer is no, then my claim is meaningless. If the answer is yes, then I need to ask, is my claim verified? In other words, has the evidence shown itself to the point that my claim is probable given the observations I can make? Alright, so 2 steps in the process if you end up using this theory for your class presentation. Number 1, think about strong verificationism and weak verificationism. If you start with strong and say, would it have a meaning on the strong verificationist principle? If it does have a meaning, then you'd ask the question, well, great, my statement is meaningful, but is it actually justified by the observations that give it meaning? For the weak verificationist, it's basically the same process, but you're going to come back and say, what would be the general observations that make it more probable? If it's true, if so, it has a meaning. But then, given that meaning, is my observation actually such that I have observed the things that would give evidence to my claim being true? Let's say we went back to something like God's existence, right? Well, we've seen these examples already, so I won't go over them again. This is actually and truly the end of the mini lecture on verificationism and positivism. And that's as much time as we have to cover this. There'll be another lecture, which I will be creating shortly, which is going to be about falsificationism. So that will start right on your outlines where they left off, but it will be a different video that you will click on.